Hi, and welcome to episode 19 of Learning Photography. Again, this kind of background information so that you are aware of your equipment. I'm going to talk a little bit about zoom lenses, different kinds of zoom lenses, because it will affect, it also affects depth of field, which focal length that you're working at, along with aperture being the primary control that we look at. But zoom lenses come in two main varieties. One where the largest aperture is constant throughout the whole zoom. I have on my EM5 Mark II right now, I have my Olympus 12 to 40 lens mounted, and so that means that it is at a wide 12 millimeter. This is a 4/3 camera, or micro 4/3 camera, so that really is the equivalent of 24 millimeters in 35 millimeter terms. So it's from 12 to 40 or 24 to 80 if you consider the equivalency. And throughout that entire focal length range, I can have an opening as wide as 2.8, so it's constant throughout that whole range. Whereas other zoom lenses are variable zooms. And so, for example, this Panasonic 35 to 100, which is the equivalent of 70 to 200 on a 35 millimeter camera, or a full frame camera, this has a variable aperture value of f4 to 5/6. So if you look at the front element of your lens, you'll see 1:4.0-5.6/35 to 100. So that is saying that at its widest focal length, the widest area of view, the smallest aperture I can have is 4.0. However, as I move up through that focal length from 35 to 100, as you see in the image, the little video clip, it's changing automatically as I move from 35 millimeters up to 100 millimeters, and I'm not touching the aperture at all. So that's what a variable focal length is, and you've got to be careful about that, because if you want to get the widest aperture opening possible on your lens, you may have to stay at the widest focal length, which means you've got to use your feet to zoom in to your subject. You have to get a little closer to your subject so they fill more of the frame. And be careful when you do that not to distort the subject, because getting too close with a wide angle, although 35 millimeters or 70 in this case is not really that wide an angle, is sometimes will distort. It's usually more the fisheye end of the scale, the 12 and 17, 18, 24 millimeter focal lengths where you get some distortion if you get too close to your subject. So it used to be photographers shied away from zoom lenses because they weren't that good, but today's zoom lenses are excellent. You know, it used to be people would prefer prime lenses, and there are a lot of people who still prefer prime lenses. And a prime lens is a lens that only has one focal length. It's 25 millimeters, or it's 35 millimeters, or it's 50 millimeters. A very popular lens is a 50 millimeter because it's supposedly the closest to the human eye. And back when I was younger, if you bought a camera and it came with a lens, it typically was a 50 millimeter prime lens because it was thought to be the closest to what your eye actually sees, and so that's what you were capturing. So just to recap, if you have, for example, a kit lens on your camera that is 18 to 55 millimeters, and the variable aperture, if you look on the front element of your camera lens, is 3.5 to 5.6, for example. Turn your camera to 18. That means at 18 you should be able to click down to on the aperture to that 3.5 opening, which is real close to the full stop of 4.0. And then look in the back of your camera, and if your camera doesn't show the aperture and shutter speed on the LCD screen, then look through your viewfinder as you do this, and turn the zoom dial out to the longest, which is 55. which is the narrowest view. Because what's happening is you've got a wide angle at 18, and as you dial down to 55, it's narrowing that field of view, like zooming in on the subjects in front of you. And watch your aperture change automatically without you touching it. Just prove that to yourself, and keep that in mind in the future when you're taking photos, and you might want to make sure you have a wide open aperture. Where you thought you had a 3.5, you may be shooting with a 5.6, and you don't want that. Okay, so that's just a little aside so that you're aware of your equipment. Look at your other lenses and see what their variable aperture range is. Lenses that are a single aperture, that is a constant aperture across the whole focal range, tend to be a little expensive. So you're paying for more mechanics in that glass, and I'm not familiar with how that all works, but you're paying for the ability to have that very wide open aperture throughout the whole range of your zoom. Thank you very much for checking in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Learning Photography. And stay in control of your camera. Thank you.